All right. So welcome everybody to Coffee with Counsel, maximizing your residence chances for matching into a fellowship, a Q&A with ASP Counsel. So this is going to be a lot of fun. We've had a lot of interest in this. We had over 100 people register, and I bet some people even are registering right now. So it sounds like we got a topic that you guys are all interested in. And so let's get started. Right along. So before we start, as is customary, what I'd like us to do is to reflect on what you are experiencing right now. So in the next few seconds, if you would, in the chat, just put in whatever emotions you've been experiencing. And if you need some help to conjure the right emotion, here's a handy wheel, and it stops spinning so that hopefully you aren't getting too dizzy. So give me some. I'll start by saying I'm a bit relieved that we're actually here. Great. Inspired, motivated, relaxed. Oh, nice. Overwhelmed. Stop now. So we're here for you. And even if you aren't sharing, and feel free not to share, caffeinated. This is Coffee with Counsel. I think that's appropriate. Acknowledge it for yourself, because that's just an important part of our experience. So great. Keep on sharing if you like. So we'll go through the purpose of this webinar, go through introductions, talk about the format, and then we'll get right into it. So what is the purpose? We're here to learn how to maximize our residents' chances of matching to fellowship. We're delighted to have a really robust response from our ASP counselors, and they've compiled a great group of specialists to help us navigate these questions. And they're going to share what fellowship program directors want us, the internal medicine residency teams, to know to maximize our residents' chances. We are joined today with a broad representation from a variety of specialists. These are members of our ASP councils. And you can see we have the cardiologists, rheumatologists, hematologists, gastroenterologists, ID, pulmonary critical care, and geriatrics. So I think we're going to get a really broad set of perspectives, and I look forward to hearing from that. We're joined by members of our APDIM Council. Susan Lane is going to be looking at the questions in the chat, and Maria will be fielding the questions that many of you have already submitted. We had over 30 questions. So the format, as I mentioned, Maria will be making sure that we address the themes that were presented in registration. And if you have a question that as we proceed that you would like to ask, please type it in the chat. Dr. Lane will field those questions and we'll dole them out to our guests. Okay, and with that, I'm going to advance the slides for ASP. Please, Dr. Luther.
Great. Well, thank you. And I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to all of you for joining. And thank you for all you do as program directors. I think the fact that you are here really shows how invested you are and how much you care about your residents. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. And then I also just wanted to start off with a bit of a disclaimer. So stating that fellowship programs are, of course, heterogeneous. And so while we have assembled a panel here to represent some of the breadth of the specialties and some other variables like location, size, area of emphasis, it of course won't be possible to represent every fellowship program. So as each panelist is giving advice, they'll do their best to speak for their specialty in general, while also giving some specific examples from their personal experience. And so while we will try to offer some tips and suggestions, there's no one magic formula or one specific path for a successful match, which really just means there are a lot of possibilities and more than one option for how you may be able to maximize your residents' chance for success. Next slide, please. And then I just briefly wanted to call attention to some works in progress for ASP. And so these build off of the important work that the AIM task forces at large are doing. So we're all working together to increase tools for feasible, meaningful applicant reviews, working on best practices for equitable and inclusive interview standards, and improving the residency to fellowship educational handoff. Next slide, please. And with regard to the upcoming interview season, the ASP Council would like to acknowledge the potential for biases that can exist during any interview season, as well as the potential for new biases that may be introduced during virtual interviews, so such as a technology bias, for example. So we recommend that fellowship programs conduct annual training to ensure equity, avoidance of these biases, and to ensure appropriate communication during fellowship interviews. Next slide, please. And we encourage fellowship programs to use the tools on the AIM website for appropriate interview and post-interview communication in order to help with this process. And so importantly, there are tools for programs and faculty development tools, but also tools for applicants with suggestions on how they can respond should inappropriate questions or other communications come up during the interview season. And so we encourage you to share those resources with your residents. Next slide, please. And we'd like to transition now to talking about the standardized fellowship letters of recommendation. These offer an important mechanism for you to be able to advocate for your residents while also providing an honest competency-based assessment of their growing skill set. We would like to thank those of you who already use these standardized fellowship letters of recommendation and ask those of you who have not yet adopted them to do so. Next slide, please. And so the template prompts you to describe 7 key areas in a structured way. One suggestion I have is to really think about what you want to highlight in the paragraph describing the residency program. So what unique experiences you want to showcase, and consider changing that up based on what specialty your applicants are applying to. So personally, I like to see how program's volume, acuity, graduated autonomy aligns with my program. And then in speaking as an ID fellowship program director, some specialty specific kind of unique training experiences that are great to see showcased are things like primary care HIV continuity clinic experiences, or global health or public health tracks, or other unique ID elective offerings. I also think the scholarly contributions section is really helpful in rounding out the information that applicants provide on their ARIS application by talking about works in progress or particular leadership roles. And then for the mastered skills beyond program requirements section, seeing involvement in hospital committees like antimicrobial stewardship or infection prevention is really great, as is leadership during the COVID pandemic, or any global health or public health initiatives or experiences. So with that, I'd like to open up the discussion now to hear what some other fellowship program directors from other specialties look for in their residency program director letters of recommendation.
Is this where I would comment?
Yes, and yes, Dr. Ju, please, and I want you to introduce yourself too.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm Janice Ju. I'm at OHSU in Portland, Oregon, and I'm the GI Fellowship Program Director there. As a program director, I really do look for this standardized letter of recommendation. And in fact, I look at the letters side by side. So I take each institution together and I read them side by side. So for those institutions that don't use the standardized letter of application template, I find it very difficult to navigate. And I've actually found it also to be just difficult when we meet the applicant. I've found there's a lot of variability when there isn't that standardization. And so I've actually gone to maybe even not wanting to consider applicants as much from institutions that don't do it, because I can't figure out who I should interview from that place. So for me, this is really, really important. And I do read about the personal characteristics and read them all side by side. So for me, I, in a very competitive subspecialty, really do look at these personal qualities that I think are really important to try and figure out in letters.
Really interesting. Please go ahead.
Shakian, if I can go in, excited to be here. Thank you for all the participants. I am a Hematology Oncology Fellowship Program Director at Mayo Clinic, Florida. You know, agree with all these points, obviously, that we came up with together. You know, I always say, you know, I mean, every program director is going to advocate for their residents, as they should. So, you know, if you think, you know, especially the PD program director, like, I guess if you're a faculty, not a program director, you could say, I'm not comfortable writing, but as a PD, you hopefully are comfortable writing a letter for everyone that you're ready to graduate. But for us, we also would like to know, where are you, you know, categorizing, or where are you basically in which percentile this person, you know, fit in? The process is very competitive, and we would like to know that, you know, is this person really, we want to know the minimal, because we are still interested in having this person. But I like when some program directors put a little bit extra in the notes to try to tell us, you know, this is some of the sentences I like. This is a person I would send my family members to. This is a top 1, 5, 10, you know, percent, or top 25%, because sometimes it's not unified. So you wonder, those who add more or put more sentences, they're actually advocating better on behalf of their residents. We know that probably rarely we encounter anybody, although I respect when a program director lists an area of improvement, so we don't call it weakness, and say, but it has gotten better throughout the fellowship, through residency. This resident progressed throughout the 3 years, and I know that sometimes mean maybe they had a little of struggle and progressed. We appreciate that, although not everyone is, you know, always do that. But I guess in a nutshell, you know, the CV, the scholarly activity, the other things, they're all there in the CV. We're looking for the program director to tell us what the CV is not able, you know, to tell us. Use some faculty, say, well, when this resident was on the ICU, they told us he or she was one of the best residents they ever worked with. This person is always there for their colleagues. You know, they cross cover, they come, their colleagues love them. So a little bit of more personal, because we take the letters of recommendation very, very seriously. Because I will end here by saying, I mean, I always joke that if I apply for fellowship now, I mean, I got my fellowship 10 years ago, probably I wouldn't get in. It's getting so competitive, where every application we're getting is so good. So we want to be fair, you know, and we want you to be fair, so we can try to see who are there, who have the potentials, and who are you telling us and screaming to us, please take those people.
Great, thanks. Other members of ASP, any other input on the fellowship letter of recommendation?
Hi, this is Gabby Wiseman from cardiology. I'll just second what everybody said. I do think that of everything in the packet, the program director letter is probably the most important, right? Because everything else is unchangeable. They can't change their USMLE scores. They can't really change where they trained, etc. But the program director letter really helps. And we get them in batches, right? So we get 10 applicants from, you know, program X. And we really use that program director letter to help judge. So it's important. And I don't know, I mean, I don't envy rather the job that you guys have to do. You know, you have so many more trainees than we do. But it becomes important just sort of know that if, you know, 10 people from University X are applying to cardiology and my place, the most obvious place to tell the difference between those 10 is for me to take 10 program director letters and just look at them side by side. Consistency is important from my perspective to give everybody sort of a fair shake and describe them accurately.
So I could add, so I'm Eli Miloslavsky, I'm a rheumatologist at MGH, and from a smaller specialty like rheumatology, we may not have multiple letters from a single program, but we do make it a point to compare across years exactly for the reason that folks mentioned, because it's that comparator that's most important in the wording within a single letter. I would also just like to add, how important it is for us to find the right fit, because the worst that could happen is to have a fellow who's really not a great match for your program, but maybe a good match for another program. And that's often something that the program director letter, by specifying the strengths, this person is a really strong in research or really strong in clinical medicine, but is not as interested in research, could really help provide that best fit.
This is Steve Barzy from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so a smaller program and 4 fellows typically, and also from a discipline that isn't quite as competitive as some of the other disciplines already presenting. But I would say, to build off of, I think, at least a comment that was made earlier, our candidates don't have to be perfect. And in fact, we recognize that, there are really some unique strengths, even if a person maybe had an area that they did struggle a little bit with. And what I look for when I'm seeing these letters from the PD, especially if someone might have, have a little blip on their record, you can tell, is just some, if at all possible, some extenuating kind of descriptions or circumstances. So that if I'm analyzing this individual and looking and saying, boy, they seem like they would fit nicely in our program for X, Y, and Z, but I just don't understand about this. And, and most of the time that whatever that this is, is fairly evident for all parties involved. So a little bit of explanation about, some of those factors, maybe those phases when something came up, extenuating circumstance, maybe, especially with COVID these days, I think it's really clear that COVID has changed all of our programs and the behavior of our programs. So I would say if there was something that was going on in the midst of the residency experience that related to COVID that took away from something, it'd be great for me to know that, because I won't know that by just looking at the CV.
I just say there was a question in the chat. What are the biggest difference? Because one of you remarked that you might not get into fellowship now if you applied, although everybody always says that, and I'm sure you would. What are the biggest differences you've seen in the trainees you're matching now compared with 10 years ago, for example?
It's a question that obviously all of us are struggling with. It just feels like what's happened is that the volume of applications has gone up. Certainly in cardiology, that feels like that's the case. Although when you actually look objectively at the numbers, it's a moderate rise every year. Even with COVID and going to virtual interviews, there was a rise, but it wasn't as dramatic. People really try to show off research more so than they should. I'll sort of say that on the other one. For us, it's important that people do research. We view that as intellectual curiosity, something that they can then highlight during their time with us interviewing, and we can get a sense as to their understanding of things. But to be frank, people feel like they need to have 20, 30 publications, and that just actually starts to look bad. As how could you possibly have done that unless you took years to do research? So I would say that, despite all of that, I'm not sure how much it's really changed. I've been program director since 2014, and it feels, more of the same with the volumes going up to a degree.
I'm an interloper here, but was asked to also comment from cardiology, and I'm an APD and relatively new. So the only thing I can compare 10 years ago was to me. And to me, the most of the, I would say a good chunk of our applicants have a better CV than I do in terms of research publications. And so I'm from Northwestern, so it's a pretty big program. And we get a lot of applications. So this last year we had 800 something applications for about 7 slots. And so I just wanted to answer the PD is that the PD letter to me, and maybe this is, I don't know, everyone can chuckle about a cardiologist's attention span. I struggle with the length of the letters, right? When I'm reading, you know, dozens of these, it's hard because they're very long. And so to me, I guess what I'd like to see is that end part where particularly, you know, and every center has a separate outstanding, excellent to outstanding or whatever. I like to see those buckets. And if there's anything personal to add about like something that's, you know, whenever I see something humanistic about the, like, you know, someone who always helped out their teammates was this, that, or the other, I think that really stands out. Otherwise, a lot of them sound the same because these are often, because it's a competitive specialty, these are often the top people from their classes. And so I will get, even from the same program, it will be 5 top candidates and they all seem great. And they all have more publications than I do as a 7th year attending. And they, you know, and so it's really hard to discern between the two, between the 7, and then multiply that by X amount of programs. So something that could really make someone stand out. But I do think the publications, you know, we've had a couple with 20, 30 publications that are real, right? I had someone with 49 publications, peer-reviewed literature publications. And he had done a couple of years, to be fair, but I had multiple where we had this amount of publications. And so I agree. I view that as, oh my God, that's a little insane. But there's a lot of places that really like that. And all those people match at really good places. I think, so my verbose thing of saying to make it some succinct summary at the end, I think is very helpful. Some way of bucketing patients. Sometimes I have broken it down to something when someone says excellent versus excellent to outstanding, where I can't invite both of them. So I have to pick between them. And then I agree with everything else. But I do think the main difference is just the publications that people have gotten are much higher. Like each of these applications, when I get it at ERS, they're often 20 plus pages, if not 30 pages. So it's a profound increase in productivity and everything, I think.
Thanks. And I just wanted to, I'll just summarize the chat because I think the questions have been answered. It was really questions about works in progress. And there's a nice answer to, you know, what we should be putting in our letter to sort of round out the scholarship. And then also, okay, if it's not in the specialty, as long as, you know, the person can talk about it intelligently and talk about their specific involvement in it and what they learned and would apply. Great comments.
Go ahead, Dr. Zhu.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to make a comment about research and sort of the volume of scholarly projects. I agree with what everyone else has said, just that, you know, sometimes when you have so many publications, it can almost get to be sort of a red flag, sort of this sense that, you know, if you publish more somehow that by brute force, you'll, you know, get into a fellowship. And this is maybe beyond the scope of the letter of recommendation, but I really do think it's important for an applicant to understand who they want to be. And I think what gets lost in all of this is the rat race. And so for, you know, a program like myself, who I also get somewhere between 500 plus applications for our 3 spots a year. And it's hard to differentiate the candidates, but it's really what you want to be able to see when you're reading the application is someone who understands themselves, someone who understands who they want to be. And that should be demonstrated more than just in the volume of you know, their scholarly work. And so to me, that is less meaningful than someone who maybe did 1 or 2 projects in an area that they personally were passionate about, showed follow through and initiative and otherwise. And that person is potentially more likely to stay in academic medicine than the person who said, well, I'm just going to publish 50 papers and go into this competitive subspecialty. I don't know if we have data on, predictors of success, but I would say that it's probably not a good predictor.
Already a fantastic discussion. As we're talking about research, perhaps we can touch on two broader topics. We were already, research is, I put that in the bucket of things residents can do to make themselves attracted to a fellowship program before the application. So I think that's a big bucket. And then I also just want to make sure that we also think about how can residents from community programs who, for us, we sometimes worry that our competitiveness may or may not be the same. And so I think that I want to make sure that we address that. But since we're still talking about research and things that residents can do, what other things can residents do as they're preparing for fellowship to help make them look attractive to a fellowship program director? I'll start with that and see where that goes.
So I could start us off and maybe make one additional comment about research. I completely agree with Janice that, especially, so rheumatology, not quite as competitive, but there are certainly programs in our field that are starting to differentiate, clinical tracks versus research tracks. And research can serve several ends. One is just to let the programs know, how committed and interested an applicant is, but there are other ways to do that to get to Alvin's point. And so I think if a resident is applying in the clinical track, at least in our field, they don't necessarily need to have a lot of research experience, but they need to have some experiences that show their interest, and to Janice's point, know what they're applying for, right? So in an interview, those residents should not be saying that I'm interested in a research career. Now, for smaller programs that may not have research experiences, especially in smaller fields like rheumatology, I think if they are interested in a research career, there are other ways to get those experiences. Even in the last cycle, I've seen a number of people who have gotten connected with people from other institutions, Twitter, and have worked on meaningful research projects through the national societies. So there are a lot of those opportunities. So if a resident from a smaller program is interested in that, it's really important to help them, find those connections. But if they're really interested in a clinical career, there's sort of other ways that we could talk about to demonstrate their interest in the field.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that that we look for in the end, and this was sort of brought up by other people. I mean, we get the same as what everybody else was saying, the hundreds of applications for very few spots, all from wonderful people that, I'm sure that 90% of them, if I ended up in my program, they'd be great. And I can only interview a small number. So we look for something that stands out either in the individual or that in their interest in us. In the end of the day, it doesn't help me to get a great individual who would much rather have been in another program. And I say that, for example, just because I see Dr. Karen Law on the line, and one of her ex-residents is now graduating as a star for my fellowship and going to Mass General next year. And the only reason I took him is because Karen reached out to me and said, hey, this guy really wants to be in your region. You should take a close look at him. And, so we were very happy. So I'm not saying that you have to do that for everybody. But if they could somehow let us know that they're interested in us for whatever reasons, whether it's geographic or we have a particular special, something that they need that helps. We look for evidence of leadership. For me, if they did a chief resident here, that's huge, or some other leadership thing, because the intellectual horsepower is there. I need to know that they're a team player and will be, good on the ground and work with in a very small group, right? It's much smaller than residency, and that they'll work well with others.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if it's worth talking about the reaching out, because that's a question that comes up, because you touched on that. So it sounds like in that case, the program director reached out to you just to let you know that a specific reason, but as program directors, we do get requests from residents to reach out to you guys. So we don't know if you want to hear from us or what we should be saying.
I don't know what the right answer is, right? None of us want to be inundated. Again, you guys have it far worse than we do, with many more requests than we ever get. I will say that select communication is worthwhile, and doesn't all have to be the program director. Sometimes it's a friend of mine in the program that is not the program director. So yes, I would be thoughtful about when to do that. I would also encourage them, especially when it doesn't make sense. You know, for us, I find that of my 800 applications that come to me, 90% are East Coast because I'm in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and that's the East Coast, right? So if somebody applies to me from Los Angeles, I'm like, well, nobody ever comes to my program from Los Angeles. Why am I going to bother? So if they really are interested, then yeah, something like that, they're going to have to overcome my general sensation that, you know, nobody's ever come to us from that area and have something, whether it's in their application or whether somebody reaches out or they reach out. I don't know, that's my take. I'd be curious what others think.
I appreciate the communication about someone who's interested in our program. Again, if it's authentic and genuine to who they are, I think better to be true to yourself than to be the, you know, sort of applicant that reaches out and then it ends up not being true. And that happens more often than you would imagine it might. And that's less important for my rank list or what happens to my program, but it's a small field. And so then you remember, obviously, who the people were that maybe reached out and weren't as forthright.
And just to build on that, I think the personal contact is helpful, particularly if you can highlight something that isn't obvious otherwise through their personal statement or ARIS application about why they have a specific connection to the area or to your program or an interest that really aligns with something you offer.
And to that, one of the questions that did come through was also, would it be beneficial for programs to encourage residents to do rotations and increase the chances of matching, or how is that looked upon?
That's a great question. I can take that. This is again Rami from Hematology Oncology. You know, I've been an associate program director for a few years and program director for the last 2 years now. To no surprise, I've been a program director during COVID, so I am getting all the time these emails and, you know, about coming. So I mean, in fairness, first I would say it's getting harder and harder, even with COVID, outside COVID, to accommodate resident from another place because of not just COVID, also our own staffing, make sure that there is no that other learners are not affecting your own learners. So it's becoming harder. So and I think I saw a recent survey that it's for some reason the numbers have decreased. But to the question is, does it help? Well, I think what they're it may help if you're somebody who you're in your residency, you don't get any exposure to hematology oncology or barely get some exposure. So yes, because it'd be nice to see that you showed the interest, going there. I think some residents go there with a goal of getting the LOR. I would say it should be mutual goal first. It should be also maybe during time when you're going to see if this is really what I want to do and get a sense which shows your interest and your enthusiasm. Second, yes, get a letter of recommendation by somebody from hematology oncology, or if you requested cardiology. I think we see it a little more just because there are some small residency programs that they don't have affiliated cancer centers. So I sit on the American Society of Clinical Oncology program director committees, and my colleagues were saying they were getting a lot of these, maybe even compared to other specialty. So long answer short to your good questions, I think it's not a must. We do like to see one of the letters from the field, from the specialty. We like to see the interest, that the letter, that the CV is saying, I really want to do oncology, I really want to do cardiology, I really want to do infectious disease. And if that was missing and that rotation would show that, then yes, so be it. But I would say in most cases I did not need, and we did not give an extra point because someone necessarily went on. And I think some are trying to go to bigger centers. Like I see a lot of residents from smaller residency program go to MD Anderson Cancer Center, to Sloan Kettering, hoping that it's a big name. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it doesn't take anything away. It could add more. But I also know I don't want residents and program director feel stressed, in my opinion, to approve sending these resident elsewhere, because I know it's not an easy process. If you have a good hematology oncology practice there and they could work with them and write something for them, I think, to me, I'll take it. If they have more potentials and they wanted to work with somebody somewhere else and you could allow it, that's great. But if you couldn't, it's not a big deal, in my opinion.
I wonder if we can ask this question. This came from Briar Duffy. Many residents feel the pressure to do research. We've talked about that a lot. But are there other non-research experiences that the residents can do to show interest in your specialty? And how important do you see those for your specialty? For example, we had heard about Antibiotic Stewardship Committee for ID.
I feel like I've spoken a lot, but one thing I talk about in GI is QI, in implementation science, is really important in our field. And I think that is a skill set that is very desired by, divisions of GI, departments of medicine, GME, a private practice. And to be able to do it well, I think really it's a field that really shouldn't have amateurs anymore. So I think that there's really a skill set that can be acquired. And so there are many fellowships, like I know the VA sponsors many of those, that I think are important. And when people take a year off, that's one of the things that I suggest that they do, because I do think it's very valuable in GI.
And I would also add that all of those interests that are really important in residency applications, medical education, advocacy, working with underserved populations, et cetera, remain important in fellowship and can really differentiate residents. And opportunities for those exist at every institution, and especially when you can marry that with your career interests. So interest in rheumatology, you work with rheumatology faculty to develop a session or a curriculum for the residents, right? Then it's a twofer, and I think all of those opportunities still really do matter.
Right, great. This has been great. So let's transition now. Let's say that our residents have gotten their interview. Now they're in their interview day. I know there's going to be a bunch of questions about do's and don'ts, and perhaps you guys could offer some things that you look for on interview days, do's and don'ts. And then I'm sure there's going to be some questions about what if our residents get questions that we wish they didn't get asked? What advice would you give to us to give to our residents?
I'm sure my faculty never ask any of these illegal questions, so I'm not sure what to say. No, but I think the major do and the major don't, which are related to each other, is be enthusiastic and don't be negative, which again, most of them do, but you find, you go into an interview very excited about something, about an applicant, and they're like, yeah, this wasn't really that great in my program, or this didn't work out. And I think that they're trying to explain some deficit in their application or perceived deficit, which again, for the most part, we don't see it. Their application looks wonderful. So I think that the main thing from my perspective is, more than anything else, is be engaged, be positive. Hard to do on Zoom at times, I can only imagine. But that's the one that like turns you off immediately when they say something like that.
And of course, just being kind and professional to everyone you're speaking to. So not just the people who you think are interviewing you, but everyone who's involved. And along the lines of Zoom interviews, I think it's really important for residents to be okay if there's a technological problem, and to show that they can kind of go with the flow, and it's not always a negative. If they handle something with grace that occurs during their interview, it can really speak very highly of them.
It's a variant of what Vera had just said. clearly our interviewing faculty, we attempt to coach all of them and remind them of what the lane lines are. And for the most part, I think they follow those. But I guess one other place where we get valuable information is from our program coordinators. The program coordinators have a lot of touches with these applicants, and hopefully the applicants recognize that they, also have an important perspective when we're starting to assess. I mean, it can go in either direction. There can be someone who wows our program coordinator, and then because we appreciate and respect the program coordinator, we think more. On the flip side, if there's, if some things occur, a program coordinator is really put off, that doesn't always speak well for their future. So just that comment.
I want to bring up also another question as going back to the community programs and interviews. What factors do you look for in community trained residents to select applicants for interviews? Is it different? What strengths, weaknesses? Or is there no difference in? I think it goes back to when we talked about the HEMONC and the ability for community programs to have less exposure to certain specialties. That may be a challenge when they they may want to benefit from those rotations outside. But I guess this question was really focused. Is there anything that would look at community trained residents and anything that would particularly help in getting applications or interviews?
Happy to, come back again since you mentioned HEMONC. Yeah. So I guess that's a usually, I would say it's an excellent question because, people say, okay, if I am in a community, residency, smaller program, are my chances any less than others? And I would say, it varies from a program to a program. I know some colleagues in program directors who really looking to have, a resident from, bigger program who've had, different exposures. Other programs, and I would say we're some of them, we look at the CVs. Now, what's the exposure? Because you're not getting any less training in community program. If any, I'm sure some of my colleagues, program directors, know that over the years, we have seen more successful fellows, more potential fellows who have come from a smaller residency program, who maybe their during residency program, they had much more clinical rotation and less research time, elective times, but they came very well prepared clinically, but they showed the potentials. Yes, we are looking for somebody who has the potential for a good scholarly activity. And, I'm looking at my fellows list right now. I actually pulled it on the side to see where they're coming from. And we have some very, very good, very successful one who came from smaller programs. But in their CV, they showed the potential. They showed that actually during a very busy clinical experience, which, by the way, some of them put that even in their personal statement, which I advise maybe, or put that in the CV, or even their PD, put that in the letter. Our program does not offer a lot of research time, yet this resident was able to do, more and more. Now, again, by default, it goes that the programs that have, the non-community, the larger, university, tend to have maybe more research elective times. So, they get to do more research. And HEMONC, yes, maybe one of these, subspecialty that we are looking for people who've done some research. So this is where I think might seems like more resident from a larger university-based program could match more. But and also, last but not least, because of the number of application, some folks, they have some filters because, how are you able to look at thousands of application? It becomes very hard. So again, I think it varies, but definitely being successful and a star or somebody who's doing very well in a community program does not go unnoticed by program directors or the program selection committee, but it varies.
Okay, thank you.
I will add on to the, Rami's point, I guess. For a pulmonary critical care, in fact, our experience is other way around, because a lot of programs have fellows in the university programs, and residents actually don't get an opportunities to even certified in a lines. While people from a community program, when I ask them, they have done like 50 central lines, 10 Quinton catheters, 50 A lines. So I think that when I am trying to select, actually, that goes even for a positive experience. And, I will encourage, but Rami's statement was absolutely right. Nobody writes those things in their personal statement, or even a program director does not mention that this guy is so competent to do procedures. And I think certainly will be helpful if they do.
Great.
And yeah, I just want to reemphasize the point that was made earlier about the importance of kind of categorizing residents and really being clear about who the top folks in the program are. And I think that's maybe particularly true for community programs as well, where some programs, may really look for that to really consider a candidate. And if it's hard to tell, then they may just not take the opportunity.
I'm wondering if we could ask you about just communication, because that comes up a lot. We talked about, early on, should we reach out to you? But then I think, this particular group of fellowship candidates have gone through residency where post-interview communication was discouraged. And so they've all sort of lived through that, and they're very not used to sending thank yous and things like that. But it sounds like that, I always tell them the fellowship world is a bit different from residency world. So I'm just wondering, what are your expectations for any kind of communication from fellowship candidates after they've met with you? And what should we be telling them?
You can tell them that it's highly variable in cardiology. I don't know. I mean, I make it very clear during the interview day that I really don't need to hear from them ever again, that I try to follow the match just as it is. I'll make my list as it is. They should make their list. And I'm really there to answer questions, which they never have. And they still send me a thank you, despite me trying to discourage them. But I will tell you that other program directors in cardiology I talk to really like those letters and communicate back and forth and use them as recruitment. So I don't know that I have a definitive answer. I do try to be fair to them. As I said in my presentation, I make it very clear what my expectations are, but that's all I know what to do.
I'm the other cardiology voice. I think it is variable. I do think it's helpful to write thank you notes, and maybe I'm old school. It doesn't have to be like a novel. It should, I don't know, it makes, this is going to sound like a therapy session. It makes me feel like they're not that interested. Right. So then when it comes up later, kind of in the interview session, we often, like, people will email us. Like, a lot of times we just don't get to meet with everyone that day, particularly virtual. And so sometimes that follow-up is like, who else did you want to meet with? So there is some follow-up, but otherwise it's kind of radio silence. And it's, I don't know, we don't hold it completely against them. Like, we still rank them highly, but I can tell you that when it comes to, when we're thinking about it and we're like talking about it, they're like, oh, that person's not interested in coming here because we haven't heard a word. Like, if the PD hasn't gotten a letter and no one writes it to me, but if the PD hasn't gotten a letter, and a lot of them interview with Clyde, if Clyde doesn't get a letter, neither one of them get a thank you letter, it kind of comes off as not being interested. Whether that's true or not, there's no data to say that. Whether it affects the match, probably not. But I think it is nice. I can tell you, I reached out and sent a letter to somebody because they had wanted to follow up and meet with somebody. And I sent a letter saying, do you have any other questions? And then they never even replied to my personal email. And I can tell you, I remember that. And maybe Gabby doesn't hold grudges, but I was like, that's rude as can be. I reply to my emails. So, there's a little bit of that, but I can't keep up with all of the thank you emails either, but I think I don't know. I still vote it's nice to get them. I wouldn't discourage it.
The part that I definitely would agree with, and it's happened to me where like they interview and then at the end of the interview with them, I say, I noticed you haven't talked to our heart failure doctor or whatever. Would you like for me to set that up for you, etc. And I'm always, and they say yes. Nobody ever says no to that. But then when I send out the email going, hey, you remember, yada, yada, I'm always surprised that about, 50, 60% never email back. And that I do view as you're not interested in me, right? But that's separate from just sending me a thank you, just because you were there.
And maybe just, I guess, another comment about communications. I personally find the emails that say, I'm very interested in your program. I plan to rank you very highly. I find them to be not useful. And again, I don't use people's emails to create my rank list. Like, we really want to say, these are the people that we rank them in the order that we want them. And sometimes they don't want you, and that's okay, because you'll probably just kind of go farther down on your list. But nobody, I guess, but me knows how far down we went on our list. And I don't have, any sort of, wounded pride if I go down farther. But I do find those emails to be somewhat vexing, because it's not meaningful to me. It's like, well, I'm you're my second best pick. I'm going to rank you number one.
I have the same thing. I don't like.
That's what I tell them too. I'm like, if you can't say it's number one, then ranking you highly means you're not number one.
Yeah. So. And then don't say it's number one. And
and don't say it's one. Right. Don't lie. Yeah.
Because people.
There's only one number one.
Yeah, there's only one number one.
Right. And I guess that begs the question. So if they've decided there is a number one, would you all agree they should tell that place they are number one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little tricky, honestly, because it's we get some mixed messages from the NRMP and others, and all these other societies about how to respond. And I mean, if we really go by the book, and I invested some time a couple of years ago and talked to our GME. I mean, I have seen some GME folks very, very discouraging of any communication after, because that could be hinting or affecting the match. And I think that's the mixed messages they're giving. I mean, look at us here. Some of us may like to see that message, like, as a human being, well, you interviewed, you're high on my list, but not even a simple thank you. But some of us not really, because they can't keep up with all these messages, or something. So I think there is no definitive right or wrong answer, because I know some colleagues and other PDs who like them, but they are worried about replying back, because they don't want to miss, like, replying to somebody and not replying to the others. You may get an email on the weekend, or you're on your phone, and this is a candidate you really liked, and they send you a nice message, so you're tempted to reply back and say, well, we really thought of you as a good candidate as well. And then some other candidate, you don't reply back. So exchanging some communication with some candidate and not others, the word we hear it, and all of you are PDs, could create some trouble. So, and I say that because I think that's affecting also some program directors, there. Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of people saying you are number one. Well, we tell them don't lie, but the reality is they're trying to also think of what's their best interest. You're their top 3 or 4, and they want to make sure they're very happy if they match with you, but you are not their top 1. So it's always the saying that they're thinking in what's best of them. And, at the end of the day, if they're lying or not, no one is going to know that lie really, except if you put them number 1 and they put you number 1 and you didn't match. So it has a lot of dynamics and different things. My approach, myself, and what I hear from others, they're nice. There's nothing, wrong, with them, because you're acknowledging some. I like when somebody bring up a follow-up, honestly, and not to brag or show off. Hey, I have this question about the program, or would this program, allow me to do this or more? That shows, some interest rather than just a cliche. but also I may not be able to keep up with all these things. So I have mixed feelings about it. I personally appreciate the thank you, and I try my best to reply with a standard message, because I want to go by the law, by the book. I reply to anyone who emailed us out of courtesy. They took the time to reply, I reply back, or our coordinator reply, and so forth.
Yeah, I will say that actually sometime even from our own program people, which like, Rami said that you only way to know that if they lie or not, if you match them number one and they matched us number one, but if that didn't happen. But I had an experience from our own program people that they said, I'm ranking our program as the first one. And when we put them in a first 2 slots with the four slots, and they didn't match here, that means they didn't rank us. And I had such an experience. So now it is very hard for me to differentiate who is lying and who is not. So everybody who is saying that I'm going to put you as a number one or number two, my personal feeling is that they're lying. And as soon as that happens, actually it creates a negative impression rather than positive impression.
I'm going to add a quick follow-up. There's an excellent question. Yeah, but I couldn't agree more with Bhavin. There's a question is, do we set expectation post-interview? That's an excellent question. That's something actually we started doing last interview season, especially it was virtual, is to actually say a little bit in a nice way and say, we appreciate it. You're welcome to email us, to send us anything. And, I've heard some other programs would say, we do not reply to anyone, so please don't take it personally if we haven't replied. Or some of us would say, yes, we will try to reply, especially if you have question. And if you are a program that discourage these or you don't like them, it's actually not a bad idea. And some programs are doing this to mention it post-interview. Hey, you don't need to let us know, or you don't need to reach out to us. Because then if somebody does something different than what you're telling them, like you're telling them, hey, reach out to us, and they don't, you can affect. So we try to do that. But again, our message is very general. You're welcome to reach out to us. We won't use it against you if you do or you don't. And again, we encourage follow up with some content. I like when somebody not just say, thank you here, it was very nice and it was very good, because then that's a lack of interest. Like, you're a human being. When you see somebody say you, thank you for the interview day, goodbye. That's like you did just the courtesy things. And so you have to be careful, because as you mentioned, Ryan, is we're human being. Every applicants feel better when they are likable and program are reaching out to them. And every program or a program directors or leadership feel better when candidates are telling them you're a very strong program we like. But the truth is, we know there is a lot of, not exaggeration, but a lot of kindness just being added up. And it doesn't always mean exactly that you're on top of their program or not.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We have filled up our hour. I think we've had a very rich discussion. So I hope that it kind of felt like this. So first of all, thank you to ASP. You guys were awesome. I'm not going to write you a thank you letter after this session, but just know it was very deeply appreciated, and it was fantastic. So for our audience, please, we got 2 questions for you. Let us know, as a form of feedback, what are your takeaways that you got, and please put them in the chat so we can see what we learned. And then the second question, the future of the webinar. So we are going to be pausing to refocus, and if you have any other suggestions of what you need in this webinar series, please feel free to type those in too. So your ticket out of the Zoom is to answer one or both of these questions. Thank you very much.